We often like to say it sounds like a movie, but boy, in this case, it really does.
We're talking about back in October of 1997.
David Ghantt, an Iraqi war vet who worked as a Loomis Fargo vault superintendent, pulled off the second biggest heist in U.S. history right here in Charlotte.
I'm sweating, my heart's going, but and once again, I hate to say this, I never felt so alive.
Because you just stolen
I just stolen $17 million.
We sat down with David Ghantt for his first and only interview since getting out of prison to talk about the story that fascinated Charlotte. The heist itself, headline-grabbing. The way they were caught, captivating. A tale of flashy spending. We're talking Gaston County mansion, a velvet Elvis, and breast implants. And when it was over, 21 people would be convicted. All but $2 million of the stolen loot recovered.
$17.5 million cash. I'd worked a lot of bank robberies and some different types of bank jobs and bank larcenies. I'd never seen anything like this.
David Ghantt was unhappy in his marriage, had been working at the cash-filled warehouse for 2.5 years when he and the so-called Loomis Fargo gang came up with a plan to rob the vault.
They were short-staffed, and I noticed that a lot of times come the weekend, I was all by myself with the master key to the security system, with all the keys to the vehicles, all the keys to the building, everything I needed. It was right there in my lap.
Ghantt teamed up with his former Loomis co-worker Kelly Campbell, a woman he had a thing for. She recruited an old friend, Steve Chambers, a convicted criminal who was once an FBI informant. The plan? Ghantt would steal the cash. His crush, Kelly Campbell, would help him get out of town, and Steve Chambers and his wife, Michelle, would hide the money.
The vast majority of it was $20 bills. And literally when somebody says, well, that must have weighed a ton, it weighed a ton.
So that night, so you're loading the money. How long did it take?
It took about 45 minutes to an hour.
They loaded the van and dropped it with Steve Chambers, then took off.
Kelly Campbell and David Ghantt get into a car, and they grab $30,000 for David. And they drive all the way to Columbia, South Carolina to hop a flight to Mexico. But when they get there, they find out that there are no flights to Mexico from Columbia, South Carolina.
Steve Chambers was also dealing with a snag.
So Steve was annoyed, right, because when David Ghantt showed up with the van, he'd taken nearly all the cash out of the building.
Ghantt had stolen more money than Steve had room to transport.
So while they're on the scene, they're trying to sort through the hundreds, 50s, and 20s and leave the 1s, 5s, and 10s behind.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, who walks away from $3.3 million?
They also dropped the keys, a ring of 200, and they didn't know which one opened the van.
And then they tried to break into the van, but they couldn't get into the van because it was an armored van. They couldn't break the window, they couldn't open the doors. They were trying to hit it with sticks and stones and rocks. So then they went key by key and eventually were able to get into the van.
But Chambers didn't go far.
I mean, they fled all the way across the Catawba River to Gastonia. I mean, it wasn't far, you know, from the original theft. So logistically, it made it easier for us to investigate that crime.
Ghantt ended up on a bus to New Orleans.
I had these big, tall cowboy boots, and I stuffed money down in them. Thank God I got big feet. And walked right onto the bus.
And pre-9/11 had no trouble jetting to Cancun. His first stop?
I went to the Walmart, and it dawned on me, I've got 60 grand. I've got cash money in my boot. I'm in Walmart. I go, I don't have to shop here anymore. So I went back out, called a cab, said, take me to the mall.
Back home, Gantt's wife reported him missing, and his cohorts in crime did some shopping of their own, though they went a bit bigger than the mall. The Chambers moved from their mobile home to this Gaston County mansion.
The rumor was that he was a past Dallas Cowboys football player, and as a realtor, I knew that the home was a cash deal when it sold, and that always kind of alerts people. That's a whole lot of money, you know, over $600,000.
Typically, when you hear that a house was paid for with cash, it doesn't mean that it was actually $20 bills, but in this case it was.
Inside, some over-the-top choices. Cheetah carpeting on the stairs, a luxurious master bathroom, the infamous painting, the Velvet Elvis, and in the driveway, a custom BMW convertible.
We're getting phone calls from friends and family members, you know, anonymous tips saying, you know, I think this is related to the Loomis heist. At first, we weren't quite sure because it just seemed ridiculous that someone didn't travel further than Gastonia with the money.
Fall turned to winter. Ghantt was still partying in Mexico, the Chambers living it up in Gastonia. But the feds were on to them.
They're learning money laundering 101 step by step. And Michelle Chambers winds up at a branch and she opens up a briefcase and she shows this teller this briefcase full of cash, which had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and says, how much can I deposit before I have to fill out one of those government forms?
Not surprisingly, the teller reported the suspicious activity. Soon the FBI was tailing the Chambers and tapping their phones.
We had found a videotape at one of the banks of Steve depositing a large sum of cash. And then we set on our way to check every bank and every safe deposit box that had been opened since the theft.
They'd found millions.
I would say by January, we knew pretty much where all the money was. We knew who most of the players were. What we were trying to figure out is where David Ghantt was. He was nowhere to be found. And half the office believed he was dead, and the other half believed he was living somewhere.
Ghantt made regular calls to Kelly Campbell, arranging to have more money sent to him in Mexico.
A phone call comes to Kelly, and she advises Steve Chambers that she knows where he is. And Steve advises her it's time to put the plan into place where we send a hit team or assassin to kill David Ghantt.
They talked about either using cyanide or getting a gun down into Mexico.
Were you afraid for your life at that point?
I was concerned for my life, yeah. I was afraid I would have to do something that would be just terrible.
You'd end up having to defend yourself and kill someone.
Oh, yeah.
The clock starts speeding up because we've got something more pressing to do here, and that's save his life.
FBI agents tracked and arrested Ghantt in Mexico, while others back here in Charlotte arrested Campbell and Steve and Michelle Chambers, raiding their fancy house. On the flight home to Charlotte, Ghantt confessed everything, including his infatuation with Kelly.
And I said to him, David, what is the deal with you and Kelly? And, what is it about her? And at first he hung his head, and he looked up at me, and then he shook his head. He said, I know you're not going to believe this. He said, but it was only just one kiss. And I looked at him, and he said, honestly, he said, I've only kissed her once. And I remember saying to David, I said, turns out to be a pretty expensive kiss, didn't it? And he said, oh, yeah, it was a very expensive kiss.
Oh, Lord, the things we say and regret 20 years later.
Was that really what it was all about?
Nah, it's always about the money.